Ride hard! We take the city!
In the bitter winter of 1299, the ground shook beneath the hooves of an approaching storm. Kutlug Khwaja, a seasoned Mongol commander, led his hardened horsemen south, past rivers, plains, and broken kingdoms. Persia had already bowed, Transoxiana had burned, and now Delhi, rich, sprawling, alive, stood vulnerable. Inside the city, advisors whispered fear. Retreat, wait it out. Let the storm pass. But Sultan Alauddin Khalji did not retreat. He looked toward the horizon and chose confrontation. When the Mongol horde reached Kili, a mere breath away from Delhi's gates, they expected another swift collapse. But this time, their charge didn't scatter men, it collided with something they'd never faced before. An army that held. Horse for horse, arrow for arrow, the Delhi forces pushed back, not with brute strength, with structure. With order. The Mongol myth cracked, and for the first time, northern India saw a glimpse of its own unbreakable potential. The story of Delhi and the Mongols didn't begin on a battlefield. It started decades earlier, in the 1222, with a prince on the run. As Genghis Khan swept across Central Asia, chasing down the remnants of the Khwarezmian Empire, one defiant prince fled south, racing through deserts and rivers, until he reached the doorstep of India. Behind him came the shadow of the Mongol Empire. That was the first time Delhi and the Mongols brushed against each other accidentally, almost. For decades after, Delhi remained on the periphery of the Mongol world, distant, untouched. But that peace was a mirage, because while Delhi prospered, the Mongols evolved. When Genghis passed, his empire fractured into four, and from those pieces, the Chagatai Khanate emerged, boxed in by rivals, cornered, and searching for a way out. West was taken. East belonged to China. But south was open, and the prize was Delhi. The storm hadn't arrived yet, but the clouds were gathering. Delhi's calm would not last. Before the Khiljis rose to power, one man had already seen the writing on the wall. Sultan Balban knew the Mongols weren't just another raiding tribe, they were a force that swallowed empires whole. He didn't wait for their horsemen to reach the gates. Instead, he built a wall of blood and iron, a chain of fortresses stretching across the Beas River in northwestern India. These weren't symbolic outposts. They were hardened, manned, supplied bulwarks meant to slow the storm. In 1285, the Mongols came to test them. At the Battle of the Beas River, Delhi's defenders held the line, but victory wore a funeral shroud. Balban's own son, Prince Muhammad, died fighting. It wasn't just a personal loss. It was a brutal message carved in blood. Every inch of land bought from the Mongols would be paid for in lives. Balban's frontier slowed the enemy, but it did not stop the march of time. A greater test was coming, and Delhi would need more than walls. Under the Khilji dynasty, the Mongol threat shifted from menace to invasion. Sultan Jalaluddin Khilji managed to repel a Mongol incursion in 1292, but the raids didn't stop. They became sharper, bolder, more focused. Between 1296 and 1297, the Chagatai Khanate sent waves of cavalry not just to test Delhi but to claim it. Then came 1299. Kutlug Khwaja, a veteran of Central Asian wars, led a massive army past the outer defenses. This wasn't a punitive raid. This was a conquest. Instead of skirmishing along the edges or probing border towns, the Mongols rode hard for the core of the capital. It was classic Mongol doctrine. Strike fast, strike deep. Break the heart before the body can respond. But what they didn't know was that Delhi was no longer the same city they'd once brushed past. It had changed quietly, systemically. As the Mongols charged toward what they assumed was a fractured kingdom, they had no idea they were riding into the jaws of a machine. Delhi had become a city of survivors. For years, refugees poured in, fleeing Mongol terror in Persia and Central Asia. Among them were not just merchants and families, but warriors. Cavalrymen who had ridden against the horde and lived. Archers who had loosed arrows under a Mongol sky and survived. They brought their scars and their skills, and in Delhi, they found a new purpose. The Sultanate welcomed them not just as mouths to feed, but as a living archive of Mongol warfare. These men knew the rhythm of Mongol attacks, the feigned retreats, the lightning strikes, and now they stood ready to teach, to fight, to build something new. The Delhi army, once a patchwork of provincial levies and noble contingents, began to evolve. It became hardened, sharpened, transformed into a hybrid force that could counter the very tactics the Mongols had perfected. By the time Alauddin Khalji took the throne, he wasn't starting from scratch. He inherited an army forged by fire, and he would make it unstoppable. Alauddin Khalji didn't just inherit an army, he inherited a blueprint for survival. But he saw what others didn't. That scattered strength meant nothing without control. Previous sultans had relied on nobles, landed elites, who commanded their own forces and collected their own taxes. But when danger came, loyalty was optional, and delays were fatal. Alauddin tore that system apart. He centralized everything. No more regional warlords, no more independent armies. Instead, he built something revolutionary for its time. A standing army, professional, salaried, answerable only to him. Thousands of cavalrymen, archers, foot soldiers, even war elephants, all drilled, paid, and kept combat ready year-round. No more waiting for reinforcements, no more excuses, but he didn't stop there. He refused to pay his troops with land, the old way. He paid them in coins, stripping the power of nobles and tying every soldier's loyalty directly to the Sultan. It was more than reform. It was transformation. Alauddin wasn't just preparing for war. He was building a state that could wage it forever. An army on paper means nothing if it can be faked. Alauddin knew corruption didn't wear armor. It wore smiles, titles, and forged numbers. So he attacked it with cold precision. He introduced two systems that felt like they came from centuries ahead. First, the dog, or branding. Every horse in the royal stables received an official mark proof of its strength, training, and readiness. No more switching war horses with weak animals for pay. The second, the shera, or face. Every soldier's physical description was recorded: height, scars, skin tone, distinguishing marks. It was a medieval ID system, long before photographs. These reforms didn't just clean the books, they restructured the battlefield. Cavalry, the lifeblood of medieval warfare, now moved as a verified unit. Every rider, every horse, was real. No phantom soldiers, no ghost battalions. The paper army became steel. And in a time where deception could cost an empire, Alauddin made sure that his system, not just his sword, would stand the test of war. By severing the army's ties to regional lords and rooting out fraud, Alauddin had forged something new, an engine of war fueled by discipline, not lineage. But with loyalty came burden. Tens of thousands of full-time troops had to be fed, housed, and equipped not for weeks, but indefinitely. Most rulers would have drowned in the expense. Alauddin didn't. He refused to chase prestige through gold-plated armor or lavish gifts. Instead, he turned every coin into calculation. Soldiers were paid modestly, far less than under previous sultans. But their paychecks didn't need to stretch far because Alauddin controlled the market itself. He froze the prices of essentials: grain, meat, cloth, fodder, even horses. He called it the Diwan-e-Riyasat, but it was more than regulation, it was economic warfare. In Delhi, soldiers could feed their families on steady salaries, while in enemy camps, inflation tore through morale. Traders who hoarded or cheated were punished publicly. Warehouses were inspected, black markets crushed. It was ruthless, efficient, and effective. Alauddin wasn't just fighting the Mongols. He was starving chaos itself. While Mongol armies galloped fast and fed on what they found, Alauddin built a fortress of logistics. He didn't just freeze prices, he fortified supply lines. Massive state-run granaries rose across Delhi, filled during harvests, guarded through drought. When famine hit, he released grain to keep prices stable. When markets flooded, he bought the surplus. Soldiers were exempt from rations. The army always ate first. It was more than fairness, it was strategy. Alauddin had created a closed loop: recruit soldiers, control their food, stabilize their pay, and ensure their loyalty. Across the plains, Mongol commanders scoured villages for forage, only to find empty fields and abandoned granaries, all locked under state control. Their horses, once unstoppable, began to collapse from hunger. The very mobility that defined Mongol warfare was dying beneath them. Alauddin hadn't just denied them a battlefield. He had denied them grass. His greatest weapon wasn't forged from steel or raised on horseback. It was invisible, made of numbers, planning, and patience. Delhi was no longer a city waiting to be taken. It was a trap. The Mongols rode with thunder, but when they reached Delhi, they found silence. No open fields, no scattered villagers, just a city waiting, ready. Kutlug Khwaja and his generals set camp near Kili, barely 10 kilometers from the capital. It was close enough to see Delhi's skyline. Inside, Alauddin faced a choice: stay behind the walls or put his system to the test. He chose the field. 70,000 soldiers, 700 war elephants, 5 divisions, each with a commander, each with a role. The Mongols brought perhaps 60,000 fewer in number, but deadly in speed and cohesion. But this time, speed wasn't enough. Alauddin had chosen the terrain with surgical precision. A dense forest on one side, the Yamuna River on the other. The Mongols were caged. He turned elephants into moving fortresses, cavalry into precision tools. No open flanks, no easy escape. Kili wasn't just a defense of Delhi. It was a defense of an idea that a system, disciplined and designed, could break the most feared army on earth. The battle began with fury, but it was deception that nearly unraveled it all. The Mongols, masters of illusion, staged a feigned retreat. It was an old trick, honed across 100 campaigns. Zafar Khan, one of Alauddin's most valiant generals, saw the opportunity and took it. He broke formation, pursued the fleeing enemy across 18 kilometers, and walked straight into the trap. The Mongols encircled his division, closing like jaws around prey. Zafar Khan fought bravely, cutting down scores before falling. His men perished with him, but when word reached Alauddin, he didn't glorify the sacrifice. He condemned it. In his army, obedience mattered more than valor. One reckless decision had risked everything he'd built. Discipline, not heroism, was the core of his design. And still, amid loss and chaos, his structure held. No panic, no collapse. The remaining divisions stood their ground. His command center stayed intact. The system didn't flinch. Even as blood soaked the earth, Alauddin's paper army didn't tear. It tightened. Kutlug Khwaja believed Zafar Khan's fall was the turning point. He surged forward, aiming straight for the heart of Alauddin's army. The Mongol center charged, fierce and confident, but they moved faster than their own flanks. Coordination unraveled, gaps opened. That was the moment Alauddin had prepared for. From behind the left flank, Ulu Khan, his reserve commander, swept in. It was not chance, it was design. Alauddin had placed his reserves behind the weaker side for exactly this purpose: to strike when the enemy overreached. Ulu Khan smashed into the exposed Mongol center like a hammer through glass. Their momentum collapsed. Their horses buckled from exhaustion. Their cohesion, the one thing the Mongols prized most, was lost. For days, the battle raged in flashes, charges, counters, screams through the dust. But Delhi's ranks held. Mixed formations of archers, lancers, and infantry ground down the invaders. And then Kutlug Khwaja fell, wounded, perhaps dying. With their leader down and their wings broken, the Mongols began to slip away. For the first time, they were running not by design, but by desperation. The Mongols didn't vanish after Kili. They returned, relentless, in 1303 under a new commander at Taragai. But this time, Delhi wasn't ready. Alauddin's main forces were scattered across distant campaigns, and what remained in the capital was battered, undersupplied, and caught off guard. There would be no grand formation, no calculated engagement. Instead, Alauddin raced back, pushing through monsoon storms, broken roads, and exhaustion. When he arrived, Delhi stood vulnerable. Weapons were rusted, horses were lame, even the air felt heavy with defeat. But surrender was never an option, so he turned to the only defense left, Siri, a new fort, still unfinished, raw in stone and strategy. What it lacked in polish, it made up in positioning, bounded by forest, river, and the city itself. The north side was exposed, but Alauddin carved a moat and built barricades from the bones of Delhi doors, beams, anything wood. Behind it, he planted elephants like living barricades, infantry like a wall of resolve. The Sultan, stripped of advantage, bet on endurance. For over 2 months, the Mongols circled Delhi like vultures above a wounded beast. Taragai's forces looted the countryside, burned villages, and dared the Sultan to come out and fight. But Alauddin didn't. He stayed behind the walls of Siri, watching, waiting, measuring time in sacks of grain and the hollow eyes of enemy horses. The Mongols weren't siege masters. They had no catapults, no battering rams, just speed and hunger. And now, both failed them. The lands around Delhi had already been stripped bare in previous campaigns. Granaries were sealed, fields were empty. Their horses, the very soul of their warfare, began to collapse. Starvation, disease, and frustration clawed at their ranks. Day by day, the storm weakened, until one morning, they were gone. They hadn't been defeated in battle, but by absence, by void, by planning. The greatest cavalry the world had ever known had crumbled before a wall of patience. Alauddin's system had held again, and this time, without lifting a sword. Victory brought no celebration, only clarity. Alauddin looked at the broken gates, the torn barricades, the survivors trembling within the city, and he understood one thing. Survival couldn't depend on improvisation. So he fortified Siri into a permanent stronghold, stone by stone, layer by layer. A wall not just of defense, but of resolve. He created a dedicated frontier army, stationed not in Delhi, but on the borders where the storm first brewed. He appointed trusted commanders, built roads, stocked granaries, and made sure that if the Mongols ever returned, they'd meet resistance long before Delhi's skyline ever came into view. They never came close again. What Alauddin built wasn't just a military system, it was a new idea of power. Discipline over bravery, systems over superstition, planning over panic. The Mongols rode to Delhi expecting a broken kingdom. What they found was a machine, a paper army. Many called it checked,
equipment
branded,
and immaculate
counted,
bearing are
fed.
expected.
But in that paper was
Next
steel,
regiment.
and in
Present
that
arms
steel,
for the
the
branding
future of
inspection.
India was forged.